Okay, we're picking up where we left off. We were adjusting the brightness and contrast of 3 layers of a composite image here. It still has 3 distinct layers, a red, green, and blue image, and we're messing around with, how bright can we make this before we start losing information or things start to really just turn white and lose distinction. So I'm brightening up this blue channel, and I'm going up to 20,000, 948. And now I'll go up to the green channel and then back to brightness and contrast. Try bringing that one up. Can we get all the way up to 20,000 without having things turn into a mess? Okay, we did there. Let's go back here and find out where were we on this one. We were at 20,948. Let's see if we can go just a tad further. 20,000. Let's get close to 20,000 even. 20,051. Okay, and then we go to the green channel. We click on brightness and contrast. Whoa, hold on there, mouse. And we're at 20,051. And we'll do the same with the red channel here. And it's just easier to move, make fine motions using these little arrowheads. And at this point, that area is really beginning to look a little soft, so let's make sure we don't go too much further. What I want to do is back out a little bit with the minus key. That's a pretty sharp looking image. That's pretty nice. Okay, we can save it just the way it is, but there's another trick we can do. There's 2 things we really ought to do. And one is that when we realign the layers and we find out that the stars weren't perfectly aligned the first time, sometimes we end up leaving behind little pixels, just little hot pixels that are in the middle of nowhere. And so you'll end up with a little blue dot here and a little green dot there. And there's a neat thing you can do that's called process noise, and go down to despeckle. And I like waiting until this phase to do it, not doing it earlier, because that will help get rid of any little hot pixels that show up. And you want to only do it once if you can. You don't want to do it early in the process and then after you move the layers have to do it again, because it can degrade the quality of your image. And now I want to zoom into an area of this nebula where you're not quite seeing the individual pixels. We're just barely. But there's a suggestion of really neat detail in here. Some little bright patches with dark lines in between them, and over here, some structure there we're just starting to resolve. And there's a way to get a little bit more information out of that, which often works. And I want to show you 2 different ways of doing it. One is you can do an unsharp mask, and so you can do process filters, unsharp mask. And I'm going to click on that, but I'm not going to say yes here. And you can adjust the parameters at this point. And so what you're doing is you're telling it how strongly to apply this mask, that is the weight here from 0.1 to 0.9, and how many pixels do you want to, you give it a radius that it works on. And I'm not going to do anything at this point, and the reason is, even though I would love to do this adjustment at 16-bit, where you have a little bit more room for fine adjustment, there's no preview here. I can't see what I'm going to get. I have to sort of say yes without knowing what's coming. So I'm going to say cancel. I'm going to say no. And let's say I really like this image the way it is, so I can go down and say image, go to color, and I need to merge it into an RGB image. So if I say merge to RGB, there it is. Now remember, I was zoomed in here, but the whole image is still there. And now if I zoom in on this one, and now I do that process, where I go to process filter, and I go to the unsharp mask. Now notice that your options have changed. You have the same dialog box, but now you have a preview button. And that makes all the difference to me, because I'm not going to agree to do something until I get to see what it looks like. These default values, 1 pixel radius and a mask weight of 0.6. Well, let's click the preview button and see what it does to our image. It just sharpens it up a little bit. Then you can undo that. You can unclick that preview box, go back and forth. Okay, well, that's pretty cool. What if we change that to not 0.6 but 0.7? Now let's preview. What does that look like? Oh, well, that looks pretty good. Okay, and if you keep going, if you get all the way up to 0.9, it might start to look a little phony. Look at that. It starts to look a little bit like it was printed in a newspaper. You know, it's just too harsh. So that's way too much. So let's go back to our 0.7. Preview that once again. Maybe even zoom in one more step. And I like that. So I think I'm going to keep that. I'm going to say yes. Go ahead. Now you could mess around with the radius. You might say 1.2 pixels or 2, or, you know, and see what you like. But, you know, in general, you want something to be very subtle. I want to add a tiny bit of detail here to just, and what an unsharp mask does is on the edge of every bright thing, wherever there's a transition between bright and dark, it will just add a little dark shadow next to a bright thing so that it stands out a little bit more. And that way you can see the modeling in here. And what it tells you is, gee, there's a lot more detail there. If I had a bigger telescope or a longer exposure, maybe I'd get even more information. And now, here's our full frame. We've zoomed out all the way. And here's my nebula in the middle of my frame. And I'm going to save this, but I think what I want to do is crop it a little bit, because I don't really want to save it quite like that. So I can go up to my ImageJ taskbar, and I can select the square tool. And then using my mouse, I can draw a rectangle. And I can say, how about we save that much of it? Throw away the rest. And I can then go down and say Image, Crop. And you got to be careful. You know, you don't get to undo this. So you go, is that really where I want to? I want to say, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. And I'll click somewhere else. And then what I'll do is I'm going to draw a slightly bigger box. Maybe I cropped it a little too tight. Okay. And so let's go to this box, and then I'll say Image, Crop, and boom, it does it. And there it is. There's my image. And so now I can click on this one, and I can say Image, not Save. That destroys your original information. Well, you really want to say Image, or rather File, Save As. Oop, I don't want to go down there. So I want to hit Save As, and then you get a choice of whether you're saving it as a high-resolution TIFF. So I'll save it as a TIFF, and I'll call it, you know, I'm going to call this M27 TIFF. Okay, and then I might want this to be on my computer or on my cell phone, or use it as my, you know, background for Facebook or something. So let's also save it as a JPEG, because that's a much smaller file size. And I say Save As a JPEG. And I'll call this M27 JPEG. And cool, so now you make that big, you know, and so you've made a beautiful image out of 3 color frames that started off looking like absolutely nothing. By keeping the numeric values of our adjustment on the minimum and maximum, by keeping them pretty close, and they don't have to be exact, you can tweak around. You might still end up with red looking stars or blue looking stars and tweak that, but I know that there are lots of little red dwarfs up in here and a few yellow stars and every now and then a blue star. Those look pretty realistic. This color here, you can compare the color that you're getting to, you know, images that you see online, but keep in mind that the final product has everything to do with your artistic sensibility. We left science behind a while ago. When we did that logarithmic stretch, we sort of left science behind. You can try to get this to come out as close to the, you know, the sort of reference colors that you find online as you can. But you got to remember that what you see is got everything to do with what mood you were in that day and how bright you wanted to make it and how harsh you wanted those colors to be. So we've saved this image, and just to mess around a bit, this other working image was still here. I'm going to zoom back out. Now, what if I wanted to really make this look harsh, and I could go to my, I don't know, let's go to my blue channel, and let's crank that puppy up to ridiculous levels, and then maybe I could, you know, take my red channel and jam that way up, and you know, you can get into weird things here. You can even create, you know, I could say, you know, you don't want to save this as your final image, but you can mess around with the way these images are displayed and create some extremely high contrast graphic images that might make really good t-shirts or posters, or you know, if you've got an image of Saturn, you might want to make it purple against a yellow background, or, you know, make that a logo for a baseball cap. So you can monkey around with these things and make them as bizarre or as realistic as you want. But I usually recommend that people try to get a pretty faithful